Okay, give me just 2 more seconds. Okay, welcome everyone to Comics in Color, Volume 29, Black Mental Health Matters, featuring Gabriel Reid. I'm really excited. This is a little bit of a new thing for us. This is a group that is focused on comics by and about people of color. But today we're going to be talking not only about comics by and about people of color, but mental health issues in our community. And I'm really excited to have our guests and to get started on the conversation. First, a couple of announcements. Um, Obviously, you're here at Volume 29. Please join us next month on Saturday, December 12th for Comics in Color Volume 30, where we'll be talking to Miranda Peterson about her book, The Avant Prince, and her new book, which is pictured here, which I'm not sure what the name is, but you can find all that out next month. So please check that out. We've got a couple of news items I wanted to talk about in the comics world. We have Nia DaCosta, who was the director of Candyman, and it was just announced recently that she's going to be directing Captain Marvel 2, the first Black woman to direct a superhero Marvel MCU feature. So I think that's really exciting. I have not seen the new Candyman, but I heard it's pretty good, and I love the old one, so I'm definitely going to check that out. But obviously, go see Captain Marvel 2. Um, Next, we have our Jerry Craft, who is a great comic writer and artist, was #1 and #2 on the New York Times graphic novels list for his books Class Act and The New Kid. So Jerry has been in Boston. I've been on some panels with him and stuff. Great guy and amazing book. Has been doing really, really well. It's a story about him as the only Black kid in a predominantly white school, and his experience is that. So definitely check that one out. And he's obviously killing it right now. Um, Wanted to announce that Regine Sawyer from Women in Comics, who we partnered with on Ladies Con, um, has been chosen to do a book in the Valentine's Day anthology for DC, which is pretty exciting. She's an independent comics publisher as well as the founder of Women in Comics, which is a con that happens in New York focusing on women and specifically women in color in the comics industry. So a shout out to Regine for that. That's big news. Um, LaShawn Colvin, who is also a comic artist, she does a story. I think she's working on a Kickstarter for a story called Beautiful Soldiers. But most notably, she opened a comic book store in I think it's Montgomery, Alabama. It's definitely in Alabama. Yes, Montgomery, Alabama. She opened it on Halloween and has been having events there and stuff. But it's always exciting to see a Black-owned comic store, much less a Black woman-owned comic store, much less in Montgomery, Alabama. So we gotta give huge shouts out to LaShawn for getting that done. I hopefully someday we'll be able to travel down there. Um, and she, joins Amalgam owner, who's why is my I'm blanking on her name, but there's another Black woman owned comic book store in Philadelphia. So that makes two that I know of. But definitely, if you're ever in the area, you need to go check her out and support that business because that's amazing. Big news that Michael B. Jordan is signed on to be a producer of a Static Shock movie that's coming up through Warner Brothers, through DC. And it seems like DC is really starting to really take the game a little bit higher. They've been kind of tripping on their movies projects, but if Michael B. Jordan is involved in a Static Shock film, I think that you can bet it's going to be pretty dope. So I'm looking forward to that. But he's also producing it with Mr. Reggie Hudlin. If you didn't know, he is part of with Dennis Cowan and Jim Lee, the legendary Jim Lee, are going to be relaunching Milestone coming very soon. This was announced last year, and I think they're still working on it. I put a little link here, which I will try to put into the chat there, and that's a link to their first issue, issue 0, where they're reintroducing a lot of these characters. Here you have Icon and Rocket, Static Shock, and Hardware, which were one of the mainstay characters, four of the mainstay characters in the Milestone family. So that's very exciting. I can't wait to see the books on that one. And lastly, I just wanted to announce that our local guy, LJ Baptiste, a good friend, a member of Comics in Color, is doing a 5-week comics club. He's done a couple of these, but this is his most recent one. So it's starting next 11/20, which I think is next Friday. Don't quote me on that. I'm bad with dates. But yeah, so check that out. He makes great comics. He's a great comics teacher. So if you get a chance, check him out. And all right, I'm going to stop my share there. And I always like to do a couple of book recommendations before we get started. I had the pleasure of getting over to Million Year Picnic in Harvard Square, which is the one Black-owned comic book store in Boston by Mr. Tony Davis. And they're not open for browsing quite yet, but you can either order ahead and come pick up, or they'll deliver it to your house if you are in the Cambridge area. They don't come to my house because I live in Roxbury. But I was able to get there, and I was looking for these two Bitter Root trade paperbacks. Bitter Root is an amazing story by, I think I might have recommended this before, but I didn't have both trade paperbacks then. But it's like an Afrofuturistic steampunk story about the Sangra family who fights demons all in Harlem and all over the country. And you got two books, which I believe is maybe like 12 issues, but a super dope story. I mean, David Walker is an amazing writer, and Sanford Green is an amazing artist, and there's a couple other people, but those are the two main ones. But definitely check out this book because it's amazing in many, many ways. And also, I wanted to recommend Twins by Varian Johnson and Shannon Wright. I got a chance to do a illustrator draw off with Shannon recently, and it was really fun. But this book is really cool. It's about two twins who are kind of struggling with being separate people in middle school, and it's really fun and well drawn and good for kids. And I would definitely recommend it. So those are my book recommendations the for this session. I also was able to pick up well, not new, but the first Ta-Nehisi Coates Black Panther. I got that this week also. And I also, this is completely, has nothing to do with anything, but I picked up this Amazing Spider-Man Election Day, and it's got this really funny part in it where Obama and Biden are meeting Spider-Man, and where is it? They got like Biden riding in a Camaro or something. But so it's got some really funny artwork about our new president. So check it out, and anything to celebrate that. So anyway, that's my recommendations for this week. Thank you. I hope you get a chance to pick those up. Now I would like to introduce Gabriel Reid. Gabriel is a comic artist, writer, and filmmaker originally from Kansas City, Kansas. He's currently a junior studying media arts and screen studies at Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts. In February of 2020, he started developing a digital mini comic called Healing Us, originally created for one of his classes. The project explores the intersection of mental health and racial justice in the US and the relationship between Black generational trauma and the institution of slavery. In the summer of 2020, Gabriel transformed the comic into a charity project, raising money for the Loveland Foundation, Therapy Fund, and 100 Black Men of America, Inc., two organizations working to heal the Black community. After the murder of George Floyd and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, all in the middle of a global pandemic, there perhaps has never been a more critical time to discuss mental health and the well-being of the Black community in the US. Healing Us starts with all of us. And that's a perfect segue into what we're doing here today. I mean, the creation of this comic was really the inspiration for this whole conversation. When you reached out to me a couple of months ago and shared this comic with me, I said, "This is awesome." I immediately bought it and really enjoyed your work and what you were doing here. So I'm really excited to welcome you, Gabriel, to Comics in Color.
Thank you so much, Cagen. Thank you for the great introduction and for everyone here in the Comics in Color community for being so welcoming. This is such an amazing community of people. I'd like to actually start by showing the trailer that I made for Healing Us that I put into the Massachusetts Independent Creators Expo in October. So let me just pull it up here.
All right, and I've given you the hosting duties. You're at the wheel.
Thank you. Wait, give me 1 second. Let me make sure I was sharing sound. There we go. All right, can we all see this? All right. Hey, my name is Gabriel Reid. I'm a writer, a filmmaker, and an artist, and this is Healing Us. Healing Us is a visual exploration of Black mental health in the US, exploring how Black generational trauma can be linked back to the institution of slavery. Healing Us is designed to spark a deep and urgent discussion on the intersection of racial justice and mental health in America. It's available as a digital download at gumroad.com/healingus. You can even read it for free. Just put a 0 in the box. If you choose to donate, however, 50% of proceeds go to the Loveland Foundation's Therapy Fund, giving Black women and girls access to high-quality mental health professionals, and to 100 Black Men of America, Inc., a mentorship program for Black youth across the nation. Read it now at gumroad.com/healingus. Spread the word. Stop the stigma. Healing Us starts with all of us. Yeah, so as Cagen was saying, I started this project as part of one of my classes, Media and Social Change, with Dr. Sean Levy. And he helped me lead to a final project where we could basically talk about whatever we wanted, as long as it had to do with the social movement or possibly a minority group or something of an issue that's happening in our community. And most of my projects in college have been always about the African-American experience. I wanted to learn more about where I come from, some of the struggles and feelings that I deal with. And so I started to dive into this a little bit more and was thinking, you know, what could we possibly be struggling with, maybe with our own mental health? And when I started doing research, I found out that African Americans are 20% more likely than the general population to deal with serious mental health issues in their lifetime, whether it be anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, etc. Suicide rates are soaring among Black adolescents by 73% between 1991 and 2017. And in that same period of time, the injury by attempt by Black boys has risen by 122%. So these are staggering statistics, yes? And I was wondering, how come people aren't talking about this more? So that is basically why I decided to create this comic as kind of a beginning of a discussion, if you will. It's a very short comic. It's only about 20 pages, and then other 10 pages are text and resources that you can find. But it's all about kind of introducing the discussion, opening the floor to discussing it in our communities, and something that has affected all of us in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, that's a little introduction to Healing Us. I know Cagen has some questions that we can dive into after that.
Absolutely, and I think it's wonderful that you like have the option of getting it for free, making it completely accessible to everyone, but and then also that you're helping support these great organizations. I think it's a beautiful thing. So everybody who's listening, go get the comic and don't put 0 in there. Put a couple of dollars and support Gabriel and support these organizations, because I think it's great. My first question for you, Gabriel, is what got you into comics? Like, what led you into wanting to create comics?
Well, so like a lot of comic creators, I've been drawing for a really long time. I think I was doodling ever since I was in kindergarten on basically everything. I drew in my notes and my homework. And one thing that I think was fun is that instead of like a lot of teachers would like tell me, oh, stop drawing. And I'm like, no, it's okay. I'm drawing the lecture, basically. I'm drawing the people we're learning about in history, and I'm drawing the people that I'm drawing ways to understand mathematics. So I always try to figure out ways to like turn math into, or sorry, turn art into helping me to understand things better. So it kind of like, works really well when I create something like Healing Us, because I'm using art to educate. And I think that's a really big part of like my upbringing. And also, I also wanted to work at an animation studio since I was really little. I wanted to work at Pixar or Disney. I love telling stories. I had like tons of journals full of movie ideas and television show ideas. So
Nice.
at some point or another, I just really enjoy developing stories, and it's something that has kind of carried with me in the kind of basically everything I do. So yeah, I think that's why I got into creating comics. It's such a visual medium, especially for me who wanted to like make animation, but I was like, I don't have the tools quite yet. Like that is a great way to like get into this art of sequential storytelling.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I think that comics is a great way to tell your story. And if you don't own an animation studio, it's a really good way to tell stories visually. I think it's funny. Part of your story is like your teacher's telling you to stop drawing. And I know I mean, that's my story, and as well as many other art students' story. But, you know, back then, they were like, oh, stop drawing, you're not paying attention. Now it turns out that while you draw, when you listen, actually helps you process the information better. And I think that's a very funny, because we all have that experience where they told us to stop drawing, but never stop drawing. That's
Absolutely.
that's awesome. And did you read much comics coming up?
Yeah, so I guess I could say that I started by reading picture books, and was wondering, wow, where can I find like more stuff that has the visual element to it? So I read a lot of graphic novels in middle school. I read Astronaut Academy. Let me think. Oh gosh, I read. Um, Oh Lord, Magic School Bus. Those had a graphic novel kind of series. I read a bunch of Pokemon manga. Um, and as I got into high school and into college, I realized I probably should start reading more comics. And my older brother also read a lot of comics, so I got a bunch of Spider-Man comics passed down to me. Got Ta-Nehisi Coates' Black Panther when you showed.
Nice.
So I really should probably be reading even more comics. I've been so into like animation and television animation. A lot of my inspiration comes from cartoons.
Yes.
So yeah, but it's a very, very cool medium, and studying it has been amazing.
Great. So
Mhm.
I noticed you said that you enjoy telling stories and that you're a storyteller. How does your own life affect your storytelling? Like, how does your environment or your upbringing come into your stories that you write?
Mhm. Well, it's affected it heavily for sure. I think there's also there's kind of this thing that I think people say where it's like, oh yeah, you shouldn't write yourself into your own stories or something like that. Like, it's a self-insert character. And it's like, why would you do that? That's what you know the most. So yeah, it's affected it heavily for sure. With Healing Us specifically, I was talking a lot about anxiety, depression, symptoms that I've experienced, symptoms that people in my family have experienced, and also bringing that into my upbringing. I grew up in a small city in Kansas, where majority of my classmates and my neighbors and were white, and I didn't have a whole lot of Black friends growing up, and therefore I felt really isolated quite a bit and lonely sometimes, and that especially is a, a, a thing that affected Healing Us. But in my other stories too, I like to I like to talk with about characters that feel like they're on their own, and they feel like they don't belong, and trying to basically embrace themselves and embrace the things that make them special about themselves. So yeah, no, it definitely has affected my storytelling heavily. And I also use art to like deal with my own emotions, as many artists do. In Healing Us, there's a lot of art style that is like strokes and lines that are just emotions, basically. Like, how do I show this in a visual way? So yeah, I mean, when I try to calm myself when I'm bored in my classes or something like that, yeah, I like to draw. I think it's something that helps me to deal with my own emotions and what's going on inside me. So for sure.
Absolutely. My experience is very similar. And I definitely like, I'm a big proponent of using yourself. I mean, if you've read my comic, it's about me. Um, using yourself in the
Yeah.
story, I think it adds a certain amount of realism to it. And it also, you know, can help you deal with some issues, right? Sometimes putting it out there um, helps you deal with it instead of like trying to keep it inside. So I think that's a very healthy way of dealing it. But I'm sure we'll get more into that. But since this is comics in color and we're about creators, right? Can you walk us through the process of creating your comics, like
Yeah.
from the idea to putting it out there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it sometimes depends on, like, the size and scope of the project and also what it's about. Healing Us, for example, I spent a lot of time doing research, as it's also part of the course that I was doing, as we had to do a lot of research to figure out what we're talking about, make sure that we're talking about it in a way that is effective and also correct. So I spent a lot of time doing research. I'm also at the beginning of most of my projects, I like to do style development, just a little style development to see like what the visuals are going to look like, what they're going to like showcase. On Healing Us, I decided to do it in black and white because it shows a lot of contrast. There's a lot of very extreme images. Again, talking about those strokes, those lines are very thick and sharp, because I wanted to showcase those feelings in a visual way. Um, then after that, I go through a thumbnailing process where I have a script and I make these tiny little boxes, these very quick, simple sketches, and they're super, super tiny little thumbnails. And then after that, I will blow them up basically on my digital device. I use an iPad and Procreate to ink over it. And then I'll put my lettering in. I don't do hand lettering, even though I heard it's like a really good thing to do at some point or another. But yeah, I just do it digitally. Um, so yeah, that's basically my whole like process. Also, I spent a lot of time on this project getting proofreaders. Proofreading is so important. It's scary to share your work. On Healing Us, especially, it was like, wow, I'm going to put this out there. Oh my gosh, this is so personal. My goodness. But you got to get it proofread, especially, and they might have great ideas that you might not have even thought of. So I had my professor, Dr. Sean Levy, proofread it. My friend Gabby Trinidad read it, and I had my dad read it. As many people as I could read as possible. And after many times, it's as polished as you can get it. So yeah, get your stuff proofread. But yeah, that's basically my process that I go through.
That's a good point, and I like that you stressed the proofreading part
Mhm.
because it's oftentimes it's something that I skip over, and I really shouldn't. I very much regret it
Mhm.
because, and it's good to have other people to bounce ideas off of, and to kind of have a network, right, of people that you can share your work with before you share it publicly, um, to get it out there. So, you mentioned, did you do character sheets? Is that what you were talking about at the beginning? You said you do kind of like uh, a style guide
Oh,
almost.
yeah. So I didn't do character sheets on Healing Us, but I did do a lot of style development. And with that, I kind of developed that there was going to be three narratives throughout Healing Us. So there was going to be three different characters that we followed. So I tried to draw like different hairstyles to try to like set them apart from each other in certain ways. But yeah, I mean, a lot of Healing Us 2 is very freeform. So there wasn't like a whole lot of like planning that I could do to like before I could jump right into it. And because of that, I think it has an interesting flow feeling to it. Character sheets are good, and I use it on some of my other projects. But I think the style guide that I use, and also developing the motifs that I use throughout Healing Us as well. There's cracks that are throughout the backgrounds that I decide to use as, and they start mending themselves throughout the story. Um,
Oh, that's
there's
cool.
yeah, there's faces that are obscured by lines, these diagonal lines that kind of come from anime and cartoons, but they show signals of distress. So using that as a part of the visual language and the storytelling is really what the important part of that process was, that pre-planning was.
Interesting. And I noticed you've used like a very different style. Like I've seen some of your other work, which is more kind of cartoony and very colorful, and where that you
Mhm.
chose to do the black and white and the heavy line work. I found very interesting. And so, can you? I know you mentioned it a little bit, but what was the decision besides just to not use color? Because color would be like kind of an easy, color and emotion kind of go together. So, what was? Can you talk about the choice to go black and white?
Yeah, again, a lot of it is due to trying to use contrast. I like the easiest way to use contrast is by going full on grayscale or black and white, because black is very, very intense and white is very, very intense. And there's these two like lines that you kind of have to go back and forth crossing. So that was basically the big reason why I decided to do black and white. I also had never tried to do black and white before. There's something about like going up against something that I've never done before and just being like, you know what, I'm going to make this a challenge. Let's try this. And like you said, like my other styles are very cartoony, very colorful. And this is a very different topic from what I'm used to, talking about in my comics. And it's very heavy. And I was thinking, well, maybe we should use black and white as a way to showcase that there's a little bit of a heaviness to it.
Mm-hmm. A little more
So
somber.
exactly, exactly. So that's basically the reason why I decided to go black and white for this one.
Okay, very
Yeah.
cool. So, I know you talked a little bit about like some of the comics you read and watched growing up, but who would you count as like your greatest influences in your storytelling and your artwork?
Yeah, I would say again a lot of cartoons. I watched a lot of cartoons growing up. We talked about a little about how like my art is almost always like there to try to like help people understand things, and that's a lot of watching PBS Kids growing up. Watched a lot of Word Girl, watched a lot of Arthur, both the fantastic shows, Cyber Chase. But even further than that, another show that I think is, if not my favorite show, Steven Universe, which
Mm-hmm.
deals with a lot of like heavy and important emotions, and does it in such an elegant way. And actually, like I look at my Healing Us comics and think subconsciously that I included cracks because it might be referencing like the broken gems in Steven Universe. It was like, wow, I didn't even mean to do that. Interesting. So yeah, those types of shows have been amazing and very influential. I also, I'm in art school, right? And I've studied a lot of modernist painters. I was thinking about Jacob Lawrence in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
my work, Harlem Renaissance artist, and Aaron Douglas, yes. And their Cubist paintings, with Healing Us especially, the artwork is pretty like simplistic in a way. Like it's again very simple lines. And with Cubism, again, it's like taking something and then bringing it down to its most like important forms.
Right.
And so I think I see a little bit of that too. Jacob Lawrence's Migration series is one of my favorites on that. So yeah, those are a few of my influences. Again, a lot of cartoons. Look,
Yeah,
cartoons are
yeah.
good for you guys. That's good.
Were you able to get to see? They had these Jacob Lawrence series that I had never seen at the Peabody Essex Museum earlier this year.
Wait.
Did you get a chance to see that?
Oh
Oh,
no, I
definitely
didn't.
check it out. It's very interesting. It is
Yeah.
very different and almost somewhat abstract in the shapes, but still
Mhm.
very Jacob Lawrence. But
Yeah.
definitely
Oh,
check
that's
if you get a
amazing.
chance to look it up. The work is different than the
Okay,
Migration series, and definitely worth looking at. Um,
for sure.
but yes, and yeah, I'm glad you mentioned some fine artists too, because they do have a big influence.
Mhm.
So we are in a crazy time in history, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic. We've had this insane election season that's going on, along with a bunch of other insanity that's been going on. How does that find its way into your stories, or how does the climate of the world that we live in now influence your work?
Well, it influences it greatly. With with Healing Us was very interesting too, because I started developing it before June, before George Floyd was murdered and the Black Lives Matter movement suddenly resurged again. But there was so many incidences that happened this year and years before and decades before. And I was thinking, wow, like this is not new. So it's always influencing it for sure. After June and moving into the fall, I started developing more characters of color. I thought, wow, I really should be doing more to put myself and see myself in these stories. And I think we talked about this at the Chadwick Boseman tribute that we had earlier this year. That, you know, when I was growing up, there was two things that I saw a lot of on TV. A lot of talking animals and a lot of white people, and no Black people, especially in animation. There's not a lot. And so that's what I would draw. So looking back at it and thinking like this year, especially, I was like, wow, I really should do more to draw Black characters. And after Healing Us, I think that's like honestly the trajectory that this is starting to go. But yeah, like I see myself in it. And I'm trying to do my best to reflect the current political environment as best I can, since, you know, that's what we use these stories for, is to reconcile and try to understand the world that we live in right now. So yeah, I think it's always influencing it in some way or another. Some more heavily, like Healing Us, and others maybe more subtle. But yeah, it's always affecting it.
I find that coming up in a come from a predominantly white area, and of course, mass media is always been predominantly white. You have to kind of like make a mental shift, right? You had to take a point. You say, "Wait a second, something's not right here. What I'm doing," and like make that shift to doing characters of color, which I think, you know, if you grew up in that environment, it's something that we all have to get there when you kind of start become your eyes open and you see the world for what it is at a certain point and realize representation does really
For
really
sure.
matter, and it would have mattered to you too if you had it right more often. So we are, you know,
Absolutely.
part of Comics in Color, part of what you're doing, part of what I'm doing is making those stories. And of course you're wearing the Black Panther t-shirt, which is the, you know, is a huge piece of that, I think, of getting our stories into mass media.
Yeah, and I'm so excited for just all the kids who are growing up seeing a Black Spider-Man on screen, for people growing up seeing Craig of the Creek on Cartoon Network. Like, that's so exciting, and we can do even more of that. I think that might be the next question that you might be asking. But yeah, like it's moving in a really good place, I think.
Yes, well, that is the next question I was going to ask. And how can
Yeah.
we ensure that diverse voices and voices of color are represented in not only comics but movies and film and books and stuff? What can we do?
Yeah, I think it's all about supporting Black media, Black owned businesses, Black artists, show studios, executives that we want more of this, please. It's kind of hard, I think, as someone who's like hasn't, you know, started working in the industry yet, but I think a lot of it comes from the top and then it goes down. So the more people that we see in executive positions who are of color, and making these decisions, these creative decisions, I think it'll be really, really exciting to this, like to add more representation to media. And yeah, I think it's all about supporting each other as well, and, you know, showing people that we want even more of this. So yeah, and if you're a creator out there, yes, draw people who look like you, draw people who look like all types of people. That
Right.
is like what we need. Yeah, Soul is so that coming out in December. We have Canvas on Netflix that's coming out, and we have all these films that are in development. The Hair Love producer apparently is working on a new film.
Matthew Cherry, yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, we're working towards it, and it's becoming better and better. But yeah, we have to show people that we want more, and I think that's so important.
Yeah, I think that's you're absolutely right. We have to support the artists, and we also have to support the indie artists. You know, the when you see a Kickstarter, when you see a you know, someone trying to fund and get their story done, support their Kickstarter. When you see a young man who's got a comic that he's trying to distribute, buy it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
from even from the most ground level up, we have to start supporting our artists and our folks.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
and you're right. There's a lot of we're in this kind of beautiful time where there's a lot happening for creators of color. I I've said this in other events and stuff, but I take it with a grain of salt because right now it's kind of hot to tell black stories and to produce black stories and to put it out there, but I want us to be sustainable in this. Whereas there's another generation of young people coming up who are telling their stories, and we're supporting the people who are telling their stories now. And it's a I think we're in a great time, but we have to make sure that it continues with our own support. You know?
Absolutely. 100% agree. It comes from all places, from ground up, all the way top. We got to support, and that's so important. So
Yeah,
yeah, you said.
absolutely. Well, I think you're doing great work, and I'm excited to get to talk to your professor, Dr. Tracy Robinson Woods, and get that started. So I would like to move on to that, if that's okay. Did you have anything else you wanted to add about your comic before we move on?
Yeah, sure. Just if you want to read it, if you haven't read it yet, go to gumroad.com/healingus. That's where you can download. You can read it for free by putting a 0 in the box, but half of all donations go to Love and Foundation Therapy Fund and 100 Black Men of America Inc. And they're doing amazing work, both of them. So yeah, gumroad.com/healingus. That's all I got.
Absolutely. Why don't you put that in the chat so that people
Sure,
can
sure.
have that link for you? But yeah, definitely support this work. I'm excited to see what Gabriel does next after this, because it's an exciting book, and it's really worth your while. And it's not a heavy read. It'll take you a couple of minutes, but it's definitely worth your time. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Tracy Robinson Woods. Um, Dr. Robinson Woods is a professor of psychology at the Northeastern Bouvet College. Am I
Bouvet,
pronouncing that?
yes, we're
Bouvet,
Bouvet.
okay. Of Health and Science, and a licensed mental health counselor on intersectionality, race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, and class, microaggressions across racial and ethnic, gender, and sexual diversity, racial socialization, and interracial families. Dr. Robinson Woods' research investigates intersectionality among race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, and class. Her current research projects are Resist to Remain Resilient Among Millennial Women of African Descent, Qualitative Investigation and Microaggressions Among Highly Educated LGBT and People of Color, and Racial Socialization Practices in Interracial Families. The fifth edition of her textbook, The Convergence of Race, Ethnicity, and Gender, Multiple Identities in Counseling, was released in 2017. So welcome, Dr. Robinson Woods.
Thank you so much, Kagan, and thank you, Gabriel. I'm delighted to be here. And, Gabriel took a class that I first taught 2 years ago called Woke. And I just will always remember Gabriel in terms of his thoughtfulness and just a pleasure. As faculty, there's a lot that we do that isn't always so exciting, but when we get students who learn but also teach, it really is a joy. So thank you, Gabriel, for inviting me to this wonderful event. I just want to say that this is a space that is so important for people to gather. And, positive youth development is one of the things that we talk about as psychologists in terms of how do we shore up strength and coping and resilience in young people so that they can push back well against these systems of inequity. And so when people know that there's a destination and a place where they can get to and belong to and speak their mind and be heard and validated, that is healing, and that is so important. I also just want to give a shout out to my intersectionality research team. I see that Nora Abdelkaram is here, and she's a school psychology student and just a brilliant young woman. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to work with her. So I had a few slides that I just wanted to talk about. It looks like the host has disabled participant screen sharing. So
Gabrielle, you got to give her the reins there.
Um, All participants, all participants. Okay.
I guess
think
that
you're
keeps people from just putting all kinds of stuff up, huh?
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, have a little bit of control, huh? So anyway, I don't know, let's see, if I put this in PowerPoint slideshow, can you see?
Yeah, if
Are you
you
able to
present
see
it,
the
it should.
slides? Okay, because I'm not going to belabor it, but so I just again thank you, Cagen and Gabriel, for what you do. It's so important. So you can see my slides now.
Mhm.
Perfect. So just wanted to start with this quote from Audre Lorde, activist, poet, um, brilliant writer. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. So these are some questions that Cagen had sent. And so I do want to address these. And so I also want this after my presentation for it to be interactive and also a space and a place of healing. Sometimes when we're talking about issues around mental illness and even mental health, people can be triggered by memory. And so I want this to be a safe place and for people to know that although some discussions can be uncomfortable, that doesn't mean that they're not important and good and even and safe. So I just want us to be able to create an environment where people feel anchored and held, if you will, as we speak about issues around mental health, mental illness, mental feelings of mental disruption. So why is there such a negative stigma to mental health in the Black community? How can we help our youth deal with the trauma that we face as people of color better than we did? So a gaze as to practices that perhaps have been in existence in the past, and what can we do to refine and tweak and keep some of those, but also realize that there are some maybe challenges with some of those practices. How can comics and artwork storytelling be used to help people of color heal from personal trauma? And how can people of color find resources to get help if they or a loved one are experiencing mental health issues? So those are, I just love the questions that were sent. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about healing. So healing is a process. It's not one and done. And I also think we need to not look at healing as a bifurcation of either you're healed or either you're broken, right? So because healing is a process and we're always having to contend with issues that can kind of put a chip in the armor, if you will. And so if we keep in mind that it's sort of like being in long-term recovery and that healing has to be cultivated and you have to keep it moving and keep it going in your life and know how to bring about healing, know what is healing and know what is not healing, and to be able to name that. So we'll be talking about that as well. Self-care is healing, laughter is healing. So again, thank you, Comics and Color, for what you do because you help us to laugh. And laughter allows us to enter into a space of affirmation, to hear ourselves laugh. I mean, have you ever been in a situation where it's been difficult because you're going through a loss and you have some depression, and then you hear other people laugh or you hear yourself laugh? It changes the way in which you feel. And so laughter is healing. Telling our stories is healing. Listening to other people tell stories that we resonate with and we say, gosh, that's how I feel, right? So telling our stories is healing, but sometimes within the context of depression, we isolate and we don't want to tell our stories because it's baked in shame. So telling our stories is healing. Writing. I loved what Gabriel was saying about drawing. Drawing is healing, you know. Literature is healing. Speaking our truth is healing. Good therapy is healing. And I preface that with good therapy because sometimes people get into therapeutic spaces that aren't necessarily helpful. And so I, as a clinician, but also as a faculty member, want to prepare students to be in the best space, to be able to create these holding environments for people across diversity so that they can emerge with more tools in their toolkit to heal. Okay, so mental health is about mood, emotional stability in terms of consistency, the ability to cope. If you are a BIPOC, Black, Indigenous person of color in the United States and arguably in the world, you are going to face difficulty. And that's the nature of living in a system that is historically steeped in discrimination, racism, capitalism, xenophobia, patriarchy, sexism, able-bodiedism, transphobia, all of that, right? So, so we are existing in systems that really didn't have our survival in mind, right? And so that is hard. It's the wear and tear on the body and the mind. And so I do believe that we can not just hang on, but we can thrive and we can live lives that are filled with power. But it's also important to be able to acknowledge that these systems exist and it'll have an impact on us. And what can we do with that knowledge? So mental health is about that awareness, knowing how our life history has been impacted by that, as well as our people's history. And it's also about identifying our thoughts and feelings about ourselves, about other people, as well as what are our thoughts about the future. So because mental health influences how we feel physically. If any of you have ever experienced depression, you know that it can change your gastrointestinal system. It can change how you feel in terms of headaches. It can change how you, the energy that you have, the appetite that you have, whether you're able to go to sleep and stay asleep, right? So all of that is connected to the whole system. It's not just your mind, it's your whole system, right? But we also know that there's this stigma around getting mental health help. And I suspect that is connected to this strength that as Black people certainly have to deal with our barbaric system of slavery and of being invalidated and annihilated. And so that we've had to be strong. And so strength is certainly something that we've had to do and continue to do, but we are also humans, and humans in their strength need help and need to rest and need to ask for help. And asking for help is not a weakness. It's not a failure of your faith or an assault on your family. It means that your sibling might be able to push back in ways that you're not, even though you grew up in the same family. And so sometimes what can happen is that, you know, if somebody's dealing with depression or anxiety, you know, families will say, well, you know, we all have had to deal with difficulty, and, you know, Uncle so-and-so or your brother or your sister, they didn't deal with it like you are. That in of itself can be shaming. And so it's important to respect that individuals have different ways of dealing with difficulty. And it's important to say, this is my story and these are my strengths, but this is where I also am challenged. And that's not a source of shame. It's what I need to know in order to get the help and support that I need. There are certain environmental conditions that disproportionately Black people and other people of color experience in terms of higher rates of poverty, overcrowding. We see that how COVID-19 has impacted families and communities where more people are in spaces because housing is expensive, and you know, people, BIPOC people tend to make less money, earn less, and so you have these conditions of overcrowding, noise, in some spaces and places. Young people and people throughout the developmental pipeline are dealing with violence, invalidating environments where people are not listening to you or shaming you for how you feel, or for how you love or for how you look. And so these are the kinds of things that wear and tear on the body. And so that's why I had said earlier that this space that Comics in Color creates is a place where hopefully, as Andre de Shield says, you can see the light in people's eyes as you enter. Because there are people that when you enter spaces, you know that there's no light in their eyes. And we have to, I think, in our own resistance, understand and not expect people who don't have light in their eyes for us to not have light in their eyes. But you have to have places where you go where people are delighted to see you and take delight in your presence. Because if you don't have that, that doesn't allow you to stave off the depression and the anxiety that comes with living. And asking for help is certainly a sign of strength. So the other thing that is oftentimes associated with mental illness is this sense of that if you would just pray harder, if you would just try harder, if you would just work harder, then you too could avoid being depressed. And people fail to realize that mental illness is a brain disease. Neurotransmitters are impacted, right? And that's why these anxiolytics and these antidepressants, these medications, are based on an understanding of how the brain is involved in mental illness. So when we think about depression, bipolar, we talk about depression, we can talk about unipolar, one pole, bipolar depression, two poles. So two poles mean there is the depressed part of it in terms of the oftentimes the sadness or the slowing down, the cognitive, the fog, disruptions in sleep and appetite, um, hopelessness, self-harm. But the bipolar is that there's this other pole, the mania, right? And so in terms of the elevated mood, the expansive mood, sometimes this sense of grandiosity of, then that can be reflected in some behaviors that feel impulsive and erratic. So, lots of spending, shopping and eating and um, uh, sexual encounters, impulsive decisions that are just erratic. And so, but what is up has to come down. And so bipolar disorders, it is still depression, but it is not the same as depression. And there are different medications that treat that. And so families need to know that usually what's involved is therapy, but also medication from a MD or an advanced practice registered nurse, psychiatrists who are MDs. And then some people will treat it with other things. As a clinician, I have quite a few patients who take cannabis, right? And so they can have their cannabis cards. By saying that, I am not articulating a position one way or another. I'm just saying that some of my patients are using other types of treatments, if you will, to deal with depression, anxiety, breast cancer, because sometimes people have said, I've tried the other stuff, it doesn't work. I gain weight, I get acne, and so as a clinician, I have to listen to all that. But we also know that the research does say that there's been real benefit for anxiolytics or antidepressants, good therapy. And then people also invoke lifestyle changes, such as thinking about your diet. How much sugar are you ingesting? Are you getting good sleep? Are you drinking water? Are you moving your body? Are you exercising? Are you embroiled in toxic relationships that are just in of themselves depressing? And so anxiety, panic, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's not just for people who've been in battle with regards to military or armed forces, but PTSD from trauma, from sexual trauma. I think people are going to be dealing with PTSD from COVID-19 and isolation and, not being able to work and not being able to feed your kids and not knowing when you can get back to work and having to be evicted. That stuff is trauma. It just wears people out because there's a sense of, it's chronic and people don't feel necessarily a sense of when am I going to be able to get some relief. And so I was appreciative of President-elect Biden when he was basically saying to people, hold on, just hold on. And sometimes there's that hope that can go a long way. So schizophrenia, which speaks to psychosis, substance use disorders, again, people will oftentimes just say, stop drinking, stop doing drugs, but these are brain diseases. And I've seen people live meaningful, loving, wonderful lives when they have been able to find long-term recovery, and help is usually what is at the center of that. So asking for help is a sign of courage and strength. So, and then disordered eating or eating disorders. So again, I mentioned that, the whole world is impacted by COVID-19, but disproportionately BIPOC and Black people have been truly impacted by the COVID-19 issues. And then atop of certainly, we have the pre-existing pandemic of racism, right? And then you have COVID-19. And so it's, that's why, and then first responders who are usually people of color going into harm's way. And so that's the environmental historical context of what folks are having to contend with. So in terms of affect, which is what we feel, emotions, it is normal to feel sad and tired and confused when you're dealing with trauma and injustice and invalidation. And sometimes people feel like, oh, there must be something wrong with me because I'm feeling so sad. And it's important to validate. These are feelings of loss often, or feelings of, again, of invalidation, of not being recognized, acknowledged, heard, listened to. And so what we are concerned about as clinicians is sadness is a part of life. You can't always be happy, right? And so depression is basically seen as you have 2 consecutive weeks of, 5 symptoms in terms of sleep disturbances and appetite issues. People sometimes lose weight, and sometimes people they eat more, right? It varies. I've also found that among a lot of Black people, they don't just slow down, they speed up. And so in a society that values productivity, you can miss depression in people because they do more, right? And so you think, oh my gosh, you're so productive, you're so active, you do so much, and people can then not necessarily see that, wow, this could still be depression because you look so culturally appropriate by doing so very much. And some people will dress up when they feel bad, and so um, that's why it's important to have an inner circle of people who know your history and who can hopefully get through and say, I'm noticing that something's off here, and I wonder how I can help, or what we can do together, that lifeline that is so critical. So I think about resistance. That's been my life's work, a theory that I developed with Dr. Janie Ward. So we talk about optimal resistance, which is a way to have a belief in oneself greater than the culture and the history's disbelief of who you are. There's social political awareness that racism exists. And that as well as it's the friends of racism, and I say the friends of racism are those other isms that I talked about: the sexism, the patriarchy, the misogyny, the misogynoir, the ableism, the xenophobia, the homophobia, the transphobia. All of those are friends of racism. They tend to be intertwined, and to have this socio-political awareness of this. But it's also important to know of our ancestors in terms of what they have done. How did our people make it through, right? Do we have stories of how our folks made it through? My grandmother had a 4th grade education. She had a 4th grade education because my great grandfather asked her when she was in the 4th grade to drop out of school so that she could pick cotton in Woodbury, Georgia. And I remember having a conversation with my grandmother about that. And I said, "Weren't you mad, Grandma?" And she said, "No, no, baby, I wasn't mad. That was my daddy. And he needed me, right?" And so, and then when she became an adult, she went back to school, and she was so proud, and we were proud of her. But she taught me, she says, sometimes you have to do what you don't want to do until you can do better. And you need to know that, so sometimes we get so focused on the now that this isn't working now. And just because it's not working now, let's honor the fact that it's not working now. But now is not forever. And sometimes we need to just try to have a perspective and say, right now, this is miserable. But your story is not over, and you get to author your story. You get to be the author of your narrative. And it's important to have communities that can help you to remember that. Intentional self-care is critical. And then I want to just involve and fold in a gender piece that oftentimes women are taught, and I would argue Black women are taught, that taking care of self is selfish, right? And that you've got to rise and meet the needs of other people. If you're going to really be, kind and nice and a good woman. And I'm saying that we can do both, but it's important that we not abandon ourselves. We can take care of ourselves. And that doesn't mean that we're negating the children and negating the partners and our parents and our communities. And so it's important to just push back against that. I think that socialization piece. That there are things that we've had to do as a people to survive a suboptimal system, and also not allow certain definitions to define who you are. And this Kujichagulia, that second principle of the Nguzo Saba, an Afrocentric model that informs our optimal resistance, is self-determination. You call out who you you can be and who you choose to be, because you can pretty much know that their systems of racism are not intended for you to rise and be your best healthy self. So we contrast optimal resistance to the suboptimal resistance, which is this persistent anger and hopelessness, which that's the stuff of intense depression. And oftentimes people need help to move through that. But the self-blame and self-loathing, isolation, you gotta resist isolation. Maintaining toxic relationships, because some of us come from adverse childhood experiences where that's what we were raised in. And sometimes it can feel like just what is normal. The shame-based is something that can keep you tethered to suboptimal ways of you. Oftentimes there's a need, because you're in such pain, to just have a quick fix, something to numb the pain. And that will create bigger problems down the road. But the eating, the drugging, the drinking can help you feel better in the moment. But it's not sustainable, and it is not in the service of health. And then, of course, denial. So our work found that armored resistance, and we did some work on microaggressions, which is a form of racism, but they're subtle oftentimes, 1,000 little cuts. And I just think about my professor from Harvard, Chet Pierce, who started talking about microaggressions back in the day. But it can mean that with armored resistance, we have this kind of hypervigilance, which is this alertness, and we're kind of scanning the environment and ready to see where are the slings and arrows, if you will, of discrimination. And it's one thing to be aware and to know that we're walking into systems that are not always have our best interest at heart, and yet that hypervigilance is so wearing and exhausting. So in terms of the healing, it's key things that I just want to speak about. We need to ask for help, know where good help is available, and surround ourselves with people who can help us and love us. Be able to name that, I am not okay, and I need some help. Not everybody can hear that, and it's important to know that there are people who cannot hear that, and there are people who can, right? So that doesn't mean that those who can't hear it, you can't have other conversations, but there tends to be this sense that if I can't talk to you about everything, then I can talk to you about nothing. And so there are some people who are not going to necessarily understand, why would you go and air the family's laundry to a perfect stranger and talk about us? And sometimes the us is the reason why you need to go to therapy. I mean, let's just be clear. You need to talk about, mother, father, family dynamics, not because you don't love people, because you do love them. And yet you want to work through the ways in which your life has been shaped by some of these family dynamics. So healing is about nourishing the body, the mind, the soul with good water, good food, to the extent that we can. This is when poverty, though, becomes a real issue. We know about the lead in Michigan. We know about the ways in which lower income communities oftentimes don't have access to, good food. And the vegetable aisle is much more expensive than the candy processed aisle. And so that's not an accident. And yet we need to be able to learn what is the good food, and what do we need to say no to when we can, and also not be shaming and damning of people because they are low income, because there is a contempt for the poor. And so it's important to be able to respect those environmental conditions that describe people's lives. We need to be able to rest when we're tired. Laying down and taking a nap, getting to bed early is not a sign of weakness, because there's this super strength myth. And you can be strong, and you can be hardworking, and you can be diligent, and you still need to take care, and retire and sleep and say no. Sometimes the best answer is no. And the slide that I want to speak to is there's power in yes. Sometimes we want to say yes, but sometimes the answer is no. And if we feel this pressure to always say yes when we really want to say no, that can breed resentment. Not now is not the same as I'm not prepared. Sometimes the best answer is later. I don't know right now. And it's not reckless. And some of us grew up parentified. We grew up in homes where even though we were children, we were given parental tasks. And so saying, I don't know, can feel like, oh, I'm not prepared, and that can feel very, 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 very stressful. So I just wanted to maybe go back. Oopsie. Um, there were a few slides. I want to just be respectful of time and have some opportunity to interact. But I did want to speak to, what keeps me from living my best life? And so, this is a more of a micro kind of a question. I think it is important to look at macro public health issues. But, let's think about, what am I dreaming of? What do I want? Sometimes people are afraid to dream because they're thinking that'll never, ever, ever, ever happen. And so I believe that the universe is listening. And so what would happen if we just dare to dream and say, well, this is what I want. I have no clue as to how it's going to come about. I do not have the money. I remember when I got accepted to Harvard and I called my dad and I said, Dad, I got accepted to Harvard. And, he was very excited for me. And I said, but I don't have the money. He says, so you're going to let not having any money keep you from going to Harvard? It's like, yeah, I need money to go to Harvard. He said, but are you really going to let not having any money keep you from going to Harvard? So I was very, very poor going through graduate school. It was a good day when I could ride the bus and buy coffee because I usually didn't have enough money for the token and for the coffee. So those days when I could ride the bus in the winter and have coffee, I felt like I had climbed a mountain. Sounds like, wow, slow pickings for you, but that was the perch from where I was coming from. So sometimes if we don't have all of the answers, we get stuck. And so what would happen if we said, this is what I want. I don't know how it's going to come about. I don't know how I'm going to do that degree or launch this, bookstore opening. I was just so appreciative of the young folk at the beginning of Cagen's presentation who are doing these incredible things, bookstores and producing and creating and authoring. People are doing their thing and they're telling their stories and they're using their craft. And it's such a beautiful example. It's so motivating. And to think about, with whom do I feel safe, loved, and valued? And it can be a scary question because sometimes you realize, and who do I not, right? And so it's important to be able to speak to that. And that can be some power dynamics, because if you're a student, for example, and you don't feel safe and loved by your key advisor, what do you do with that, and yet can that key advisor move you through your program? And there are other people who are not your key advisors, but who can walk with you on that journey, because sometimes premature exit and severing ties can be can create more challenges, and it can be tricky as to know, well, when do I need to exit? Because sometimes, you need to go. And so sometimes you need good mentors. You do need good mentors. I went to a session the other day, a workshop on mentoring, and Dr. Landry talked about you need a board of directors. Everybody needs a board of directors, people who can help you to make good decisions about your life. Is this a good time to do this? Or what do you think about this? So there's the therapy route. Yeah, that's great. And there are some people who may not even have the education that you aspire to, but they can still be wells of wisdom. So we have to, not be elitist and thinking, well, you don't have a college degree. And going back to my grandmother, I remember once I had gotten into, Harvard for graduate school, but I didn't want to stay for the doctoral program, and I wanted to go somewhere else. And so my grandmother at the time, with her fourth grade education, said, so did Harvard offer you any money? And I said, yeah, but Grandma, you don't understand. I don't want to stay here. And she says, oh yes, I understand. Right. And so just because she didn't understand higher education, she knew life. Right. So the board of directors can be people across education, but they have something of value to share that can help you to make some really good decisions, people who you trust, people who have your back, and people who hopefully you'll listen to, because sometimes we don't want to hear what we don't want to hear. And that can be a real stumbling block. There are times when we need to stand down and realize that, wow, I didn't get that right, and I need the wisdom and hopefully the love and the gentleness of this person to say, you might want to think about this, and so, and also to hope is important. When I get out of this situation, or when I move out of this house, or when I finish my degree, or when if we decide to, I was going to say, if we decide to take the vaccine, I know a lot of Black folks don't want to take the vaccine because they think it's been rushed. And yet, when we think about maybe a safer time to take the vaccine, because I want us to live, how will I change my situation? What change will have to happen in order for me to feel like, gosh, I've turned the corner, things are better, right? And that's the hope, because things may not be ideal right now, and for a lot of us, they're not, you know. Um, and so, but now is not forever. And we come from a people who have been able to endure and persevere, but they've not done it alone. And families have come together when during slavery, when children were sold away from their families. Other people came in, when children were left because their parents were sold. So that extended family, godparents, that is a historical tradition of ours in terms of how we as a people knew that we needed to count on ourselves, in order to fill in gaps that we possibly could fill in. I've been reading this book. I'm not done with it, but it is a book, the unapologetic guide to Black mental health. Navigate an unequal system, learn tools for emotional wellness, and get the help you deserve. I really appreciate the sister for writing the book, and she names a lot of cultural issues around stigma that can get in the way of people being able to say, I'm not okay, and I've not been okay for a while, and for families to realize you can pray, and I believe in prayer because I'm a woman of prayer, and you can get some therapy, because it's not either or. And so it's important that we move away from this notion that we only do this to treat the problem, because sometimes we need more, and that is perfectly okay. So I'm going to stop sharing, and at this point, respond to any questions or comments, Cagen.
Sure, that would be great. If anybody has comments, they could either raise their hand or put it in the chat, and I'd be happy to share it. That was amazing, Dr.
Oh,
Robinson Wood. I felt like you were talking about me a lot of the times. Especially with the eating through trauma thing. I've been eating like crazy through this whole COVID thing. But I also was, when we first got locked down, it was interesting because I'm one of those people who, if I'm feeling bad, I just work harder. So I was working. And when COVID hit, it was like all of a sudden I had to stop, and I had to start really like dealing with all the things that I've been ignoring because I was able to just work. So
right.
it was interesting dynamic that happened. And then what I ended up using a comic, right? I started chronicling my experience being stuck at home, doing working from
Mhm.
home, homeschooling through my comics, and found that to
Yes.
be very, very helpful. Just kind of getting it down and putting it out into the world, and with the hope that other people are feeling the having a similar situation, they can realize that you're not alone out here,
You're not alone.
right? And I also think you made a really good point about hope. You know what I mean? And we've had it's so important to kind of hold on to that hope, and it's been really hard, especially in those last 4 years with the I mean, it's also always been hard for people of color to
Yes.
have hope, but we've always had it somehow. But
Mm.
this uh, past 4 years, it's been very difficult because it's been just felt like it was just eroding hope daily with all the silliness and shenanigans, and seeing our brothers and sisters murdered on
Yes.
on videos, and it just
Mhm.
felt like it was chipping it away. And we got just a little taste back with the election going the way that we would like it. I'm not saying by any means that the upcoming administration is perfect, but at least there's like hope, right?
Yes.
With a previous administration, I had zero hope, but now I have some hope. So I think that's
Well,
an
it's an
important
excellent
piece.
point, Kagan. I mean, I think a lot of people are feeling that way. I was really touched by Van Jones last week when he openly wept about, this sense of relief that he felt as a dad, and as a brother, and as a global citizen of saying that, folks can wake up and feel like, it's a new day, and that, this hatred, this xenophobia, this Islamophobia um, is not there. And so I think that that's such a powerful point. But people have been writing. I mean, I'm just really in awe of the scholars and folks over the last 2-3 years who have been writing. I've really been inspired by Layla Saad's work, Me and White Supremacy, and Ajima Oluo's work on So You Want to Talk About Race. So folks are just coming against this racism and saying, this is what we can do. This is what we know. And so silence is violence. And I'm seeing white people and white students and Latinx communities and people throughout the world, and Asian voices and indigenous voices coming and speaking from their own truth about, your story is my story, and so not everybody is going to have that sense of unity and purpose, but let's know that there are people, who do and who are looking for us as we look for them. So that openness is so key. And I like what Gabriel said about, let's draw folks, who look like us, folks who don't look like us. But I think it's important to honor the fact that there is an anti-blackness as a component of racism that sometimes is hard to name, and yet that is what I think you were speaking to, Kagan, with respect to what we've been dealing with for the last 4 years. You're
Yes.
spot on with that.
I've got a question here from the chat from Mr. Reggie. How much of the stigma of mental health in Black people is due to glorifying the struggle, or in a destructive case, using the anomalies or Black people who overcome obstacles and become super successful?
Yeah, that's a lovely question. Certainly we've seen folk who have become super successful. We know that Asian communities are oftentimes upheld as the model minority, and they're in many ways being used to pit themselves against, Black folks and folks of color who are not nearly as successful. And we know that some of that model minority is steeped in colorism and racist and tropes. So let's not be blind to that. So we know that there are people who've overcome. We've always had Black folks who have, you know, I guess from Cotton to what was the senator's name? He's Republican. From Cotton to Congress. So we've had people. Yeah, we've had people, who have overcome. And the challenge, though, and I want to celebrate people who have been able to move themselves from maybe poverty into upper middle class status. But you can work really, really, really hard in this society and not get very far. And so this notion of individualism and and meritocracy, that we all start off at the same place and we all get the same chance. I mean, we need to just name that for what it is, which is it's not accurate. There are privileges that follow people intergenerationally as a function of having white skin. We know the research shows that white women without a high school diploma are more likely to have live births than Black women with a college degree. And we know that Black people with master's degrees oftentimes have less income than white people without even a college degree. So I think it's just important to. That's why we have to name systems. This is not about work really hard and keep your nose clean. There are systems in terms of racism and sexism that create barricades for people. And some people are able to quote unquote be successful, but even then, my research has looked at highly educated people of color, and most of them talk about microaggressions, the ways in which people question their intellectual mettle. You have a PhD from an elite institution and people still wonder, well, did you get here because of affirmative action? So it doesn't disappear the racism with regards to folks who have made it. So I think it's just important to know that there are people who are diligent, working hard, um, and there are systems, historical chronal systems in place that have been in place for a long time, the backbone of this country in many ways, that are about impeding the progress of certain bodies. And at the same time, I do believe that people, especially when we unite together in terms of unity and support and shared economics and representation and political representation, it can make a difference in terms of pushing back and opening up doors and using your privilege. So if you make it open, use your privilege to open up doors and windows for other people to get in. Because privilege, I think that's the power of privilege, but just don't keep it for yourself. How can you use your talents, your skills, your education, your money to bring other people in and then have this expectation that you too lift other people as you go and as we rise together? And that sense of unity really does come in the face of this individualism, this focus on the self, and what I've got to do. And I think that's some of the challenge we're seeing with this mask wearing. There's not this sense of my behavior affects you. I need to be accountable to you. And so even though I may not want to wear the mask, it's helping me, but it's helping you. And so the collectivistic spirit, I think, allows us to feel the sense of connection with other human beings, because individualism is very thin. And I think it's ultimately too much of it is unhealthy. I hope that was helpful.
Yes, I think that it's funny how this individualism that has been preached for hundreds of years here in the United States is literally killing us right now. In countries that have more of a community, a sense of community, are doing so much better because they are used to doing things for other people or being in confines where, if you are built up, then I'm built up. You know what I mean? Whereas in America, we're like, step on somebody else's back to get higher. And I hope that there'll be a shift
Yes.
in the way that we look at things now that we're dealing with this global pandemic and looking at another lockdown.
Yeah.
I've got another question here from Rebecca. Do you think that there is a new resurgence of Black leaders helping all Black people heal?
Oh, that's lovely. A resurgence of Black leaders. Oh, I think that we've had, Black leaders. You can have literary leaders. I've been so grateful for James Baldwin. I mean, his words are like a balm to my soul, and so, and Audre Lorde, and Langston Hughes. I mean, the poets and the writers, um, artists have always given us color and given us stories to live by. So those are leaders. I don't know if the person was intending to speak about, political leaders. Which I think, certainly we've seen more and more, even within Massachusetts, we have our leaders, in Congress. And so I'm grateful for that. But I also appreciate leaders who sing in terms of the music, the way in which that can motivate us and speak our stories into existence, the ways in which we are entering as Black people areas where we haven't had a lot of representation, I've never played tennis. I like racquetball, but I've never played tennis. And yet, when I think about what Serena Williams has done and Venus, and in terms of their power and what they've had to endure, in terms of the gendered racism that they've had to experience. So leaders, I think, are in many different areas. Academic leaders, you have faculty who realize that they have a responsibility as well as an opportunity to teach and to encourage new leaders of students to push back and resist some of these systems that are very, very old. So yeah, I think I'm encouraged by people rising up and saying, I'm not putting up with this irrespective of who is named as, you know, president. I've been encouraged by that. I also know that people are tired. And I know that on our team, we're going to working on some a research proposal to listen to licensed clinicians, people of color, to get a sense of what's been your experience as you seek to heal other people and listen to their stories, and what do you need, and what's it been like for you, because the healers need healing too, right? And so and to ask those daring questions, and not look at the master's tools to help you to, you know, build a house, or dismantle one, you know. So yeah, I feel that this is a time of encouragement. And you know, and I'm a baby boomer, so I'm older than most people on this call. And so I see what young folk are doing. And you know, I just I'm grateful, you know, because I realize that your histories are very much like our histories, my histories, and other baby boomers' histories, and yet, you know, there are some experiences that you've not had, and yet there are still you know, trails that you're having to navigate. And so when I see young people doing all this lovely stuff, like we have done over the years, you know, John Lewis, I always think about his Good Trouble, you know, and what he had to contend with. And so grateful to him. And the words, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King, you know, in terms of this silence that we oftentimes hear from quote unquote good people. And so who do we want to be? Do we want to just look like we're good leaders, or do we want to be good leaders? And so we've had some wonderful examples of good leadership across different domains. And for that, I'm grateful.
Yeah, to tack onto that, like in cartoons, I'm looking up and I see Ian Jones Cordy or Aaron Magruder, or I see Floyd Norman working at Disney, like very old animator, but and like they're Black, and I'm just like, wow, I guess I could do this,
Yes, you can.
maybe. So yeah, it's incredible to see it in like different sections, different domains for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think our leadership, like you said, there's no one size fits all. I think that many different leaderships and many different realms is the best, because there's no limit, right? I want young people to know, and older people to know, that there's no limit to what you can do, right? There is no box. You know, they want to put us in a box, but there is no box. So I think that's an important point. And we're getting a little short on time, but if everybody's cool with staying for a little while longer, there are a few more questions. If everybody's good. Someone came in the chat with a question for Gabriel about what work he's interested in doing for co-op or post-grad.
Mm.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Pluto, by the way. Thanks for coming. For co-op, I'm looking at doing a lot of pre-production or development jobs in whether it's TV or film. That's kind of my dream right now. And then post after that, I mean, you know, I'm really just looking for jobs to tell stories in, whether it's in writing and developing these stories for children, or for middler age kind of thing. So that's kind of what I'm looking for, and also doing more comics. Honestly, yes. I think I'm going to continue indie comics throughout the rest of my existence for sure. So yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
Well, anybody who's hiring out there,
Very good.
Look out for Gabriel, definitely. And I look forward to seeing more comic work that you do here. I have one more question, then we're going to wrap it up. This is from Gregory Reid. Are we living in a time where we should embrace the idea that we should all take a leadership role in whatever way we can and not depend on national or celebrity for leadership? I would say yes.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say yes, too. I think it's important to know when help is not coming. I know that sounds kind of bleak, but it's freeing, you know, because it means that we are not waiting for someone to come and assist us, because help is available. But, you know, I think that some of us have been waiting for some help, you know, from certain people who have a history of not showing up, and certainly we've seen some of that, I think, within the last, you know, 4 years. And so what does it mean when we realize that, help, that kind of help isn't coming? It can free us up to say, well, maybe I need to not expect that it's coming. Is there something that I can do? Is another form of help? Um, am I rigidly tied to only a particular kind of help that I think is going to come, or from a particular type of person? And so I think it's, sometimes help is there, and we're thinking, well, you're not the right person to give it, or, so I think that we have an opportunity and a responsibility, when we hear that young people are engaging in self-harm, something's wrong, right? And so we also know, as psychologists, it's from my perch, what is it that human beings need for healthy development? And that's why I mentioned youth development at the beginning of this, is that, that allows young people to not be isolated, to gather with other people, to name the socio-political forces of racism and discrimination, but also to be actively involved with other people, in terms of projects, reaching out, serving, educating, learning, creating music, creating art, getting education, um, you know, being involved with political spaces, knowing what your people have done historically to survive. This is not the first time that we have been up against a wall, or we have said, my God, what day are we living in? What is happening to us? This is not the first time. And so we do our ancestors disservice if we don't hold in memory what people have dealt with, and what they have figured out. And so I know my concern with this COVID-19 is that people haven't been able to gather for church, for those people who do go to church. And so for a lot of people, that's really the one spot in your week where you can maybe get a hug, or somebody can say, oh, your hat's pretty, or, how you doing? And and not everybody has a computer. I mean, we have computers, but I think some of us know of older people who don't have computers, or, it's not even just about age. And so I just think that, what does it mean to be not able to, because we're social beings, it's just part of our DNA. That's how the species has been able to evolve over time. And so we need other people. And so what does that mean when we can't see and be seen? Well, I think it helps to know, uh, this is not going to always be the case. And, the voice is good. It's not the same as seen, but voice is good. We used to write letters, but just to know that you can lay eyes on people, even if you can't, even if you have to be 6 feet apart, that can make a difference. So I think it's just important to hold in consciousness who might need my help. And even though we're strapped and we're doing all kinds of things, is there something that I might be able to do in terms of showing some kindness, or reaching out to people who could benefit from a word of comfort, a word of encouragement, during these difficult times.
Yeah, and we also live in such an age where it's just like I think we can all become leaders in a way. We all have social media, a lot of us do anyway. And in the summer, especially when we're seeing just like people filming things that we might have never been able to see before. And suddenly it's just like, wow, this is now something everyone is seeing. So, I think social media, the digital age, has allowed us all to become leaders in some way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
And yeah, also like, COVID era is definitely very hard to interact with people nowadays. But, like without computers, without Instagram, without being able to draw on my iPad and stuff like that, like I wouldn't be able to finish this comic. I wouldn't be able to talk to my grandma who lives on her own in all the way in New Mexico. I'm in Kansas right now. It's so far away. So it's just like, I think we're being more connected. There's all sorts of problems that come with social media, but I think it also is allowing us to become leaders all in our own way. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I remember a question that I asked on the exam was, do you have to be digitally, it wasn't even the exam, it was a personal narrative. Can you be woke without digital literacy? And so I think that I know I've had to interrogate my own digital literacy, just in terms of how do you reach out, and I went to a workshop just last week, and the woman who, Dr. Landry, was saying, Twitter has changed her life. And I thought, wow, maybe I can come out, without kicking and screaming and get a Twitter account, because I've been resistant. And yet, how can you open up your world and reach out to people by being able to access and have access to a world of where technology is here and it is not going anywhere. And so that's a good point, Gabriel. And that does help us to be the leaders we want to be in many ways. For sure, for sure.
I think that's some great points. I think that's, you know, realizing that this isn't the first time that we've dealt with adversity, I think is a good thing to remember. And, that folks of color have been, you know, succeeding and thriving through a system that's been, set up for us to fail for hundreds of years now. So
Yeah.
this is nothing new. We can go out there and make it happen. And I'm, one of the other things is like one of the silver linings that I always say about the Trump administration was we really started to realize that help is not coming, right? And you have to do it for yourself. And that's one of the things that inspired me to start Comics in Color was, nobody's going to do it. So I'm just going to do it. And I'm going to create a space where people's voices can be heard and they can be helped and we can, connect with one another and, create. So I think it's a very important place to be and a place to understand that we can all, like Gabriel said, we can all be leaders. The gatekeepers that kept us from creating our own things, creating our comics, our own films, our own groups have been washed away. And now we can create whatever it is we want. And the only thing that's stopping us is, just doing it, right? Just realizing that we can do it. So we're getting to the end here, but I wanted to, before we left out, I just wanted to ask Dr. Robinson Wood if she could just tell us well, first of all, there was a question in the chat asking about that book that you mentioned, the Unapologetically Black.
The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health.
Yes.
So yeah, let me just put that back up here.
Yeah.
I haven't finished it, so I've started reading it, but I'm grateful that Dr. Walker has written this work, and she does touch on some important points. Namely, she does speak about stigma, and so I'm really appreciative that this kind of resource is there, and there are other ways in which she can help the reader to think about their therapy and different types of resources and self-care from a kind of a holistic perspective, because when we move our bodies and when we eat differently, it can make a big difference. I know that we're short on time, but I just wanted to ask Nora if there was anything, Nora, that you wanted to share, if she's able to hear this. She's a advanced school psychology PhD student, and has a wealth of wisdom with respect to mental health in schools and children. So Nora, if you're able to.
So I guess I would say I would say that in terms of a strategy that could be really helpful for children who might be struggling with racism in schools, I think it's really important for them to have a strong sense of social support, because depending on the school they're in, they might not necessarily be getting that from their teachers or from their peers. So developing spaces where it's a safe space for kids of color, where they can just kind of decompress and talk about the struggles that they're having with microaggressions, racism, even the things that are happening in the world, I think is like really important to support the mental health of children. And then I would say, like, on the university level for students as well, I think it's kind of the same thing, that if you are struggling with professors or just struggling with the whole environment of academia, creating like your own support group or your own social support, or if possible, seeking out a therapist of color who is familiar with microaggressions and racism. I think that all of those things are really important and helpful tools. And of course, I agree with everything that you've said, Dr. Robinson Wood.
Thank you, Nora. I just, Nora and another student, Chantal Muse from the Intersectionality Research Team, they are not just talking the talk, you know, they're walking the walk, and that they've created these spaces for students of color to gather, because they know that students of color in higher ed oftentimes are dealing with microaggressions or dealing with an environment that is unwelcoming, or an environment that questions, you know, why are you here? Why is this Black body in this space? You know, and it may not be that overt, but they feel it. And so, and it can be kind of challenging when you know that there's something about the environment that doesn't feel safe and welcoming, but there's nothing overt. And therefore it can be hard to communicate and to share and tell, because people say, what are you talking about? You know, I don't understand. Or, you know, and so having spaces where people say, yeah, I understand exactly what you just said, you know. And so she's created that space for students of color to come and gather along with Chantal Muse, and also another group for students across race to learn more about issues of diversity and multiculturalism. So I'm just so proud of them for really taking their time, because they're busy, they're students, right? To basically say, I can do this, you know. I've been meeting with the counseling staff at Northeastern University, just to help to kind of speak to them and listen to them about their concerns of working with students of color who come to the counseling center for help. Because, you know, if it takes courage to go to that counseling center or call for an appointment, that's huge. And then if you go and you want to talk about issues of discrimination or racial identity or being bicultural or being biracial or multiracial, and you have a nice therapist, but you know, you don't understand the thing I just said. That is insult to injury. People don't come back for that. And so, but oftentimes the clinicians may not have been taught appropriately to how do you dig in deeply to broach these difficult conversations around race. So people need skills. So when people are saying, could you come and help? Because we want to learn this and we want to have these difficult conversations, then I have to go and see what I can do in that space, because people are saying, I want to do better. And you know that the students will benefit if the staff can do better. And so, but race is a fugitive topic in this country. You know, our research keeps showing that over and over. It's hard for people to talk about it, and white fragility gets in the way all the time, because white folks get upset when we name difficult things about race, and people of color have learned to not get white people upset about about racism. So, you know, we monitor that and try not to make white people mad. And so that creates really difficult situations where we have to say, wait a minute, let's just call it for what it is, the difficult conversation. We're going to have it or we're not. And if we're going to have it, then let's have it, and not believe that we all have to be comfortable all the time. No, we can't be comfortable all the time, and people of color are not comfortable all the time when dealing with race and racism. So let's be adults and think about our children and our adolescents and young people, and let's have the conversation and get the resources in place. And because there's so much stuff, there's so much literature, books, webinars, podcasts, um, workshops. People are working to say, we can do this. We can talk about race. We can talk about racism. We can heal our racism. The anti-racism healing workbook. I mean, people are doing, like Layla Saad has a 28-day program for, you know, white supremacy. So there are resources and there's help available. But some people are performative and say they want the help, but they're not willing and ready to dig in. And if that's the case, then we need to name that and call that out too.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I really want to thank Gabriel and Dr. Tracy Robinson Wood for coming and talking to me and talking about Black mental health and sharing their work and their stories. And this has just been wonderful. I feel like this conversation could continue for another 2 hours, but unfortunately we got to cut it off. This has just been amazing. I'm just blown away. I learned so much today about mental health and what, you know, how to deal with it and things that other people are going through, and it has been really, really amazing. And I just want to thank you and everybody else for coming and sharing this moment with us. And if there's anything you'd like to say in closing, please go right ahead.
Well, I just want to thank you for having this space, and it creates healing for people to gather. You know, we cannot change everything that we face, but as James Baldwin said, we cannot change unless we face it. We can't change anything. So these kinds of forums give us an opportunity to face the difficulties. And then if we're struggling, then we can hear from somebody else to say, well, you know, I dealt with that situation. This is what I did. Or you might want to do this or not do this. And so it's not a therapy session or a group therapy, but it is a space for people in safety and in unity to gather. And that's what we need. So let's continue to gather in places where we can acknowledge each other and encourage each other and support each other and just say, you know, you keep on moving, you keep on going. We're going to get through this together.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with all of that. Healing us starts with all of us, as we say. Thank you, all those who came out to this conversation, and I hope you found it interesting and valuable. Shout outs to Josh Tywater, who's a fellow comic artist here. Shout outs to my family, my mom and dad, my sister, and my auntie who are here.
Yes.
They have to be proud of you, Gabriel. I know I am.
Thank you. Pluto and Victoria, who are fellow Huskies, go Huskies. Thanks for coming. This has been really awesome. I hope you found it awesome.
This is awesome.
Yes.
Thank you
So
much.
please support Gabriel's work. Go and buy Healing Us. Check it out on Gumroad. He put the link in the chat, and join us next month, December 12th, for our conversation with Miranda Peterson, where we'll talk about some more comics. All right. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Nora.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you,
Bye,
Nora.
everyone.
Thank you for
Yeah.
adding on. That was awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye,
All right.
everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.